And welcome to Fox 7 News Special Report. I'm Alex Michelson.
I'm Marla Tayens.
In Jefferson Park.
Bill Schubit's live with us in Jefferson Park. We're joined by retired LAPD Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey as well.
And the big news tonight, George Floyd's family speaking in court of the pain they felt over his murder and asked for the maximum punishment for former officer Derek Chauvin.
My family and I have been given a life sentence. We will never be able to get George back. My niece Gianna, she needs closure. I'm asking that you please find this.
That's an emotional Phalonis Floyd, one of two Floyd brothers who spoke in court today ahead of Chauvin's sentencing. He told the court he has reoccurring nightmares about Floyd begging for help. After the sentencing, he told the press his fight for justice continues. He was among those with Reverend Al Sharpton.
So let us not feel that we're here to celebrate, because justice would have been George Floyd never have been killed.
Sharpton also saying Chauvin's sentence is the longest a police officer has been given in Minnesota history. All right, let's get her reaction from Sergeant Dorsey. We'll start with you. Your thoughts on today's sentencing?
I was surprised that he was given 22 years. I thought it was going to be a lot lower, but nonetheless, it wasn't enough. I mean, how do you quantify the life of an individual? And we saw during his bizarre statement to the family, he as he did in the field, he expressed no real remorse, no contrition. He expressed his condolences. He's the reason that we're all here. And so I'm happy that he's going to get the 22 years in state prison. We'll see what happens with this federal trial that's yet to come. He may get more. And I don't know if this is going to do much to deter other officers. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, we have some sound of Derek Chauvin actually speaking. Hopefully we can get that ready and hear from him. It was sort of bizarre what he said, and then at the end of what he said, kind of hinting that more is to come. Take a listen.
This time, due to some additional legal matters at hand, I'm not able to give a full formal statement at this time. But very briefly, though, I do want to give my condolences to the Floyd family. There's going to be some other information in the future that would be of interest, and I hope things will give you some peace of mind. Thank you.
So it's sort of like teasing at the end of a TV show or something, Cheryl, like tune in to the next episode to see what happens. Sort of bizarre, huh?
It's nonsensical. And listen, what could he say? What would be coming forth from him or any of his representatives that would bring this family clarity, that would find interesting, that would be comforting? The time for him to show some clarity to this family would have been, I don't know, maybe 30, 40 seconds into him sitting on their loved one's neck. It was just nonsensical. And listen, the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree, because we heard his mom talk about what an inconvenience this is going to be for her, because she's not going to be able to see her son for a number of years. How about the other family? No contrition, no remorse, no humanity shown from him or his mother for the family of George Floyd.
And that was the first time that she spoke out publicly. All right, Phil, to you.
Sergeant, you were a street cop for 20 years. We can't really appreciate exactly what that involves. If you can, and you've written a lot about these subjects, you've talked a lot about these subjects, put yourself in the mind of Derek Chauvin during that time. His mother says he's the nicest guy, just wants to help people. So what was he thinking? Was he thinking he was doing his job correctly?
I can't speak to what he was thinking. And listen, he may very well be a nice guy. He's just not nice to black people. And we heard the defense attorney try to say, what a yeoman's job he did and how he received all these accommodations. He neglected to say that he had 19 personnel complaints racked up under his belt as well. And so I would have to say that what he was thinking was, I'm going to make this black man pay. We saw him put on gloves as he was arriving at the scene. Officers only do that when they're about to punish you, when they're about to put in work. And then he sat there and dared anybody and everybody to intervene for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. He was enjoying it, I would have to say.
It's interesting to me that after your career as a law enforcement officer, your post law enforcement career, you've turned into a critic of the police. Is that
Well,
fair
be
to
clear,
say?
Phil.
And what happened?
Yeah, be clear. I'm the same person I've always been. I call a thing a thing. When I was on the Los Angeles Police Department, I testified at the murder trial of Douglas Iverson, a white police officer who I worked with in Central Traffic Division, who shot and killed a black tow truck driver by the name of John Daniels. So this isn't anything new to me. I've always been very outspoken. I'm for what's right. And so I just call a thing a thing.
You mentioned that you were surprised by the sentence. So it's 22 and a half years. With time served, though, 199 days credit. Good behavior comes into play. This could come into play eventually. He could be paroled after 15 years. Of course, there is the other federal lawsuit that he's facing where he could get more time. But I'm just curious what you make of that when he could walk out when he's 67 years old.
Well, I understand that because this is a state sentence that it will probably be halved in terms of the time that he's actually served. But understand this, he's a police officer in prison. And so 15 years is a long time for a police officer to have to look over his shoulder, because you need to know that anybody can get got, even in prison, even with special consideration, even with being placed in segregated housing. We've seen what happens to other high profile individuals in a state penal institution. And so 15 years is still a long substantive time.
Yeah, there were a lot of emotional moments today. One of the most emotional was listening to George Floyd's daughter address the court virtually. Here's Gianna Floyd.
If you could say anything to your daddy right now, what would it be?
It would be, I miss you and I love you.
You just feel for that girl. You feel for the brothers that testified as well, and that got to look Derek Chauvin in the eyes today. And Phil, I know you spoke to a lot of people locally as well to get their reaction.
Well, Alex, a lot of the people in the community here, and we're in front of a Black Lives mural Black Lives Matter mural that's been up for more than a year now. They had a similar sentiment to George Floyd's family, that this sentence, while harsh, was not nearly long enough. We'll show you some of the conversation they had earlier today. This is with Earl Ofari Hutchison and Reverend John Mosley from the National Action Network, two longtime community activists. They've been fighting for equal justice for people in communities of color for generations now. And I asked both of them for their reaction to this verdict.
25 years and above should have been a sentence for Mr. Derek Chauvin, because again, it was a global witnessing of a murder. Torture.
We want to make sure with Chauvin that the message goes out. Any police officer, and I can't understate that enough, any police officer that abuses their badge, abuses their authority, victimizes a civilian, there's going to be a severe punishment, a severe penalty, and it's not going to be drug out.
And of course, here in Southern California, one of the loudest and strongest voices in favor of police reform, police accountability, is Medina Abdullah, familiar to our Fox 11 viewers, one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. I got her reaction to the verdict this afternoon.
Given that one of your tenets is police accountability, do you feel like this is an example of that? Is this progress in your view?
I think that what this demonstrates is the power of people organizing, that we know, were it not for the courage of the 17-year-old child, Darnella Frazier, who pushed back against the city and police department's narrative that George Floyd died of quote unquote medical complications, we wouldn't have even known the name George Floyd. We know, had people not flooded the streets, not only in Minneapolis, not only in Los Angeles, but all around the world, that we wouldn't have seen the prosecution of Derek Chauvin, let alone a conviction.
Melina Abdullah calls this a day of mourning, a day we'll all remember. And remember, Alex, Christine, and Sergeant Dorsey, the research that I've seen shows about 1,000 people are killed each year by police officers in the line of duty. A Bowling Green State professor who researched this said that there have only been 11 prosecutions for murder in like the past 15 years. And this sentence is definitely on the high end. Remember, the maximum was 40. The prosecution and the family wanted 30.
Yeah, and Sergeant Dorsey, I'm wondering how you think this has changed policing, because there's a lot of people in law enforcement that would say, look, 99% of us are good people. We don't agree with what Derek Chauvin did. We're angry that he makes all of us look bad. Where does law enforcement go from here? Because we've seen that morale has really dropped off in the last year.
And that's part and parcel as to why I speak the way that I do. And I agree that the majority of the officers, men and women that are there for the right reason. We only hear about these repeat offenders, those like Derek Chauvin, who had 19 personnel complaints, who get the attention. In Vallejo, California, there's a group known as the Fatal 14 because they've been involved and engaged in so many fatal shootings. And so now we see some police officers, that minority, doubling down. So I don't know that much is going to change in terms of how police officers conduct themselves. Those who are determined to do things that are contrary to their training. We see officers stepping away from specialized units. Over in Portland, the rapid response team have their feelings hurt because they feel unsupported. And so they didn't retire because they're cowards. They didn't quit the job. They just stepped away from a specialized unit. We have an officer with over 90 complaints who was just the reason for a civil settlement in Columbus Police Department for the murder of Andrew Hill, I believe is his name, 47-year-old unarmed Black man. And so police officers and police chiefs to some extent are doubling down on officers should not be held accountable, and that somehow this is an affront to them if they can't abuse people of color willy-nilly with reckless abandon and without any accountability.
Do you think that this is progress, that this is police accountability, today's sentence?
It's helpful. It's helpful. We know that in this case, the officer was given one of the more higher penalties. We saw that in the case of a young man in Texas, Jordan Edwards, officer that shot him, was given, Roy Oliver was given, I think, 20 years, and Michael Schlager was given, I think, 15 for the murder of Walter Scott. So it's a beginning. We've got to start somewhere, but let's not be happy. This is not a celebratory time. Someone lost their life, and Black folks and brown folks continue to be victimized by errant officers like Derek Chauvin on all of these 18,000 police departments across these United States.
Phil, you've been reporting on the streets of Southern California for 3 decades now, interacting with law enforcement almost every day over that. Have you noticed a change in the last year in terms of tactics, in terms of attitude, in terms of the approach of law enforcement here?
Well, it's a complex question because the relationship, from my perspective, between the LAPD, the Sheriff's Department, and communities of color is greatly improved than it was a generation ago. That was a large part due to when Bill Bratton came in, and then Charlie Beck, and now Michael Moore. Sheriff Villanueva and his department have been involved with very controversial shootings. But we have body cams now. We have much more awareness of the fact that everything you do is under scrutiny as a law enforcement officer. The racial composition of law enforcement has changed dramatically. I don't have the numbers right in my head, but LAPD is significantly more female, African American, and Latino than it was a generation ago. So all those things are progress. Having said that, there's definitely an attitude by some of, I don't want to get involved. I don't want to take this on. I don't want him shooting me on a cell phone and posting it to social media and accusing me of something that I didn't do. So it's a complex relationship.
Sergeant Dorsey, let's let you have the last word here as we look toward the future and police accountability and bridging the divide between the communities of color and law enforcement. What's your message?
The next step needs to be the dismantling of qualified immunity. If officers are not intent on murdering Black folks, they need not be worried about qualified immunity being something that they can no longer hide under. And I just like to say this to my good buddy Phil. If he thinks things are better, he should probably talk to the people who live in South Central Los Angeles. And listen, the Sheriff's Department has 17 internal gangs, executioners, regulators, the jump out boys who go out and get tattoos for beating and killing folks. So I'm not really quite sure, Phil, that things are as good as you say they are in South Central Los Angeles.
I didn't say they were good. I said things have changed, and a lot of people think they've changed for the better. You know more about the inner workings of law enforcement than I do. I will certainly give you that.
And of course, qualified immunity is something that's being debated right now in the congressional George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. It does not seem like there is going to be a major change to qualified immunity, but that's part of active negotiations. Karen Bass at the center of that. Cheryl Dorsey, thank you so much. Great to see you. Phil, always great to see you.
Thank you both.